My name is Clayton Harrow. I'm 41 years old. My wife's phone had started sleeping face down on the counter every night for about 4 months. I noticed it the way you notice a crack in a windshield. Small, then suddenly all you can see. By the time I counted, it had happened 11 times. 11 client dinners. 11 texts that said the same 3 words, "Don't wait up." I thought that would be the hardest part of my week. I was wrong. Because 2 nights before I rekeyed our house, I sat in my car outside a restaurant called Hills and Vine and watched my wife laugh at something a man said, her hand resting on his forearm like it had done that 100 times before. But here's what she didn't know. By the time she got home that night, I'd already called a locksmith. There's a scene that comes later, an empty driveway, a suitcase on the porch, a woman standing at a door that used to be hers, asking a question I never answered. I'm not there yet, but I will be. 15 years ago, Lorna Whitfield married me in her mother's backyard in July, and I remember thinking, watching her walk across that lawn, that I had somehow gotten more than my share of luck. We built something that looked, from the outside, like exactly what people want. A house on Ridgeline with a porch swing I built myself. 2 incomes, no kids by choice, 2 dogs by accident. She ran marketing for a mid-size furniture company. I designed load-bearing systems for buildings that would outlive both of us. We were, by any measurable standard, fine. I want to be honest about something, because it matters later. I was the one who kept the peace. If something needed smoothing over, a fight with her sister, a missed anniversary, a slow year at her job, I smoothed it. I told myself that was love. I didn't examine it much closer than that. For years, client dinner meant exactly what it said. Lorna's job had real hours that bled into real nights. I never thought to question it, because questioning felt like an insult to something I believed we had. The first time I noticed the phone thing, I didn't think anything of it. She'd always kept it close. But close became face down. Face down became a code she typed too fast for me to see, shoulders angled just slightly away from me at the kitchen island. Probably nothing, I told myself. She's stressed. There's a product launch. I said that to myself so many times it started to sound less like a fact and more like something I was trying to convince a jury of one. I didn't ask her directly. Not because I didn't want to know, because some part of me had already started doing the math, and I wasn't ready for the number it was giving me. The first real crack came on a Tuesday in March. She said the office was ordering in, working late on the Bellcrest account, home by 10. At 9:40, I drove past the office on my way back from the hardware store. Habit, nothing more, and the lot was dark. Not one car. Not hers. I sat at the light a beat too long. The car behind me honked. She came home at 10:15, hair slightly different than it had been that morning, and told me the meeting had run over at a coffee place downtown because the office Wi-Fi went down. I said, "Oh, that's annoying," and made her tea, because that's what a good husband does. That's what I'd always done. Later I'd understand that was the exact moment I chose not to look. There was a way to find out. I could have asked which coffee place, could have asked to see the presentation she claimed to have redone twice. I didn't. I let it go because letting it go was easier than what I might find if I didn't. I've built my whole marriage on not asking the second question. I thought once, standing at the sink, and then I put the thought away like I put away everything uncomfortable. Folded small, filed somewhere I wouldn't look at it again soon. Through April, the pattern sharpened. Dinners ran later. Perfume changed, something warmer, more expensive, unfamiliar on her collar when she leaned in to kiss me goodnight, which she still did, every night, like a woman closing a door quietly enough that no one hears the latch. My sister May came for Easter and watched Lorna for exactly one dinner before she pulled me into the garage under the pretense of looking at my truck. "Something's off with her," May said. "I can't tell you what, but I've known her 12 years, and she's not looking at you the way she used to." I told May she was imagining it. I told myself the same thing on the drive she took back to Columbus that night, gripping the wheel a little tighter than the road required. 2 weeks later, Lorna left her laptop open on the kitchen table while she showered, and I saw, for 4 seconds, before I closed it, a calendar entry that just said H&V 7. No name. No context. I told myself it stood for a client. Harmon and Vance, maybe. Something corporate. I didn't open the calendar to check. That was the second time I chose not to look. By May, the dinners were happening almost weekly. I started noticing the tells that had probably been there for months and that I'd simply refused to catalog. The way she'd check her lipstick in the hallway mirror before leaving for something she called just work. The way she'd stopped inviting me to the company happy hours she used to drag me to. The way she'd started sleeping slightly turned away from me. A small human distance that took up more room in that bed than either of us wanted to admit. If you'd asked me directly, in May, whether my wife was having an affair, I would have said no. Not because the evidence wasn't there. Because I hadn't let myself hold all of it in one hand at the same time. That changed on a Thursday when her phone buzzed on the counter while she was in the shower, and the notification banner read, "Marcus, same table as last time?" Winky face. I stood there with a dish towel in my hand for what felt like a long time. I didn't wake her up and demand an explanation. I didn't confront the phone. I wrote the name down on a receipt in my truck later that night. Marcus. Folded it and put it in the glove compartment, underneath the registration, where it would sit for 3 more weeks before it mattered. In my glove compartment sat a folder, 3 weeks old, never opened. I want you to remember that. If I had opened that folder the night I wrote the name down, everything that follows would have gone very differently. The next few weeks, I did something I'm not proud of. I got quieter instead of louder. Lorna, if she noticed, never said anything. If anything, she seemed relieved by my silence. She mistook it, I think, for the same trust she'd always been able to count on from me. That trust had built our whole marriage. It was also, I'd come to understand, the exact thing that had made all of this possible. I threw myself into a job that was already eating too much of me. A mixed-use development downtown, tight deadlines, structural revisions that kept me at the office until 8 most nights. It was the kind of work that let me not think, and I used it exactly that way. I told myself I was being the provider. I didn't examine how convenient it was that provider and avoidant looked, from a distance, like the same man. One night, I got home at 8:40 to a dark kitchen and a note. Dinner with the Bellcrest team. Don't wait up, L. No kiss emoji. She used to add one, small and automatic, at the end of every note like that. I noticed its absence the way you notice silence after a fridge finally stops humming. I sat at the table and ate cereal standing at the counter, and somewhere in me a small, cold voice said, "You know what this is." I told the voice to wait. I started noticing other things too, the kind of details that mean nothing alone and everything together, though I wouldn't understand that until much later. A charge on our shared card for a wine bar downtown, on a night she'd told me she was at her sister Renee's. I mentioned it, casually, over dinner. She said Renee had wanted wine, so they'd gone out instead of staying in. It made sense. It also happened to be exactly the kind of explanation designed to make sense. A parking ticket in her coat pocket from a garage 6 blocks from her office, dated a Tuesday, time-stamped 9:52 p.m. I found it doing laundry. I photographed it before I put it back exactly where I found it, told myself I was being paranoid, and didn't ask her about it. That was the 3rd time. I want to be clear about something, because it's easy from the outside to think a man in my position must have been oblivious. I wasn't oblivious. I was making a series of small, deliberate choices not to know, because the marriage I had, imperfect, quiet, occasionally lonely, was still something I loved, and the alternative felt unbearable. I understand now that avoidance isn't the absence of knowledge. It's a decision. You make it because the truth costs more than you're ready to pay, right up until the day it doesn't. If you've ever caught yourself explaining away something you already half understood, staying quiet because the silence felt safer than the answer, stay with me, because the night I finally stopped explaining things away is the part of this I still think about most. Renee called me directly in early June. An accident. She said later she'd meant to call Lorna. "Hey, are you guys still on for Saturday? Lorna said you two wanted to do the thing with the Fletchers." I didn't know any Fletchers. I said, carefully, "Remind me what night that dinner with you was again?" "The wine bar one." There was a pause, just a half-second too long. "We didn't," Renee started, then stopped herself. "You know what? I don't remember. Ask Lorna." I hung up and sat in the driveway for 11 minutes before I went inside. That was the moment the shape of it started to become undeniable, even though I still didn't have a name to put fully to it. I had a name, actually, folded in my glove compartment, but I hadn't let the two things touch yet in my mind. Marcus was a stranger. Renee's confusion was just Renee being scattered. I was still, even then, building myself an exit from what I already knew. Sleep started going first. I'd lie next to Lorna, her breathing even and untroubled, and stare at the ceiling doing math I didn't want to be doing. Dates, receipts, the sound of her voice on the phone in the bathroom with the fan running so I wouldn't hear. I lost 8 pounds that month without trying. My hands, gripping the steering wheel on the drive to work, had developed a small, persistent tremor I hadn't had before. I noticed it and thought, distantly, that's new. The way you'd notice a stranger's habit rather than your own. At work, my business partner Devin asked if everything was okay. I told him I hadn't been sleeping well. He didn't push. Nobody pushed. That was the whole architecture of my life at that point. Nobody pushing, me not asking. Everything held together by an agreement none of us had made out loud. The turning point came on a Wednesday in mid-June. Lorna told me she had the Bellcrest dinner again, 3rd time that month, and would likely be home around 10. I said okay. I kissed her cheek. I watched her back out of the driveway in the navy dress she used to wear on our anniversary, years ago, back when the world was smaller and I understood all of it. I didn't follow her. I want to be honest. I almost did, and then I didn't, because some old, tired part of me was still hoping that if I didn't look, there'd be nothing to see. Instead, I drove to the office, worked until 7, and on my way home passed Hills and Vine, a restaurant Lorna had never once mentioned in 15 years of marriage. Her car was in the lot. I didn't go in. I sat in my truck across the street for 4 minutes, engine off, and watched the window until I saw her, laughing, leaning across a table toward a man I didn't recognize, her hand resting on his forearm the way it used to rest on mine. I want to tell you, I felt rage in that moment. I didn't. I felt strangely, terribly calm. The way you feel when a fact you've been avoiding finally sits down across from you, and you realize it was never going anywhere. I didn't know it yet, but that calm wasn't peace. It was the last quiet before I started moving. I drove home that night and didn't say anything. Lorna came in at 10:20, kissed my cheek, said the Bellcrest presentation had gone long, and asked if I'd eaten. I said yes. I hadn't. I went to bed before her and lay there listening to her move through the house. The fridge, the faucet, the particular rhythm of a woman who has no idea her whole story just changed shape without her. The next morning, I called a private investigator named Ruth Calloway, a name Devin had once mentioned in passing after his own divorce. I didn't tell Devin why I was asking for her number now. Ruth was blunt on the phone. You want confirmation, or you want ammunition? I want to know what I'm actually dealing with, I said. She took the case. For the next 2 weeks, I lived 2 lives inside one house. In one, I was the same husband I'd always been, steady, quiet, unbothered. In the other, I was a man waiting on a phone call from a private investigator, checking his email during meetings, flinching every time his phone buzzed. Ruth's first update came 9 days in. Photographs of Lorna and a man named Marcus Devereaux, 44, entering a hotel off Route 9 on a Tuesday afternoon. The same Tuesday she'd told me she was at a training seminar in Dayton. I looked at the photos exactly once. Then I closed the folder and didn't open it again for 6 days. I told myself I was being careful, methodical, unemotional about it. The truth was smaller and less noble than that. I was giving myself time to not have to act yet, because acting meant it was real in a way that watching from a distance didn't. If you've ever kept something folded small in a drawer, afraid that opening it fully would make it impossible to close again, I understand that better now than I ever wanted to. There was a night, around this time, when Lorna reached for my hand across the couch during a movie, unprompted, the way she used to years ago. I let her hold it. I didn't pull away. Some part of me, soft, stubborn, unwilling to fully surrender the marriage I thought I had, wanted, for 1 hour, to just be a husband watching a movie with his wife. I understand now that this was its own kind of lie, gentler than hers, but a lie all the same. I was performing a marriage I already knew, with near certainty, didn't exist anymore. Here's what she told me, much later, about that stretch of weeks. This is what she was living through while I sat with a folder of photographs I couldn't fully look at. I told myself it was almost over. I'd end it after the Bellcrest launch. I kept saying, like the timing mattered, like there was a version of this that wasn't just cruelty stretched over a calendar. Some nights I'd sit in my car in our own driveway for 10 minutes before going inside, rehearsing my face. I was so tired of rehearsing. And some part of me, the part one hated most, didn't want it to end yet, because with Marcus I felt like someone worth looking at again, and I didn't know how to give that back. That's what she told me. I knew none of it yet. I was still assembling my own version, piece by piece, in a glove compartment and a private investigator's folder. May called again in late June, this time with something more specific. She'd run into Lorna's co-worker Priya at a farmer's market, and Priya had mentioned, offhand, that Lorna had been glowing lately. Must be nice having Marcus around the office more. May said Priya caught herself immediately, backtracked, said she meant a new hire, changed the subject fast. Who's Marcus? May asked me directly. I told her I didn't know. It was the first time I'd lied to my own sister, and it didn't sit right in my chest for days afterward. That was a turning point I didn't recognize as one until later. The moment I started protecting the secret almost as much as Lorna was protecting hers, just from a different angle. I wasn't protecting her. I was protecting myself from the moment I'd have to stop pretending. Ruth's second batch of evidence arrived on July 2nd. Bank records showing recurring charges to a boutique hotel, a florist Lorna had never once used for our house, and a joint credit card statement with a $1,080 charge from a jewelry store neither of us had discussed. I sat with that number a long time. Not the affair, the number. $1,080. Something about its specificity made it worse than a vaguer, rounder sum would have. It felt deliberate, chosen, real in a way the photographs, somehow, hadn't fully been. That evening, Lorna came home distracted, checked her phone twice at dinner, and when I asked, casually, testing something, whether Bellcrest was almost wrapped up, she said, almost, a half-second too fast, eyes somewhere past my shoulder. I didn't push. I never pushed. But something in me had shifted from waiting to know to waiting to decide what to do with knowing. And that shift, small as it felt in the moment, was the one that mattered. She didn't know it yet, but the calm she'd come to count on from me had already started turning into something else entirely. By mid-July, I had what I needed. I also had, underneath that, something I hadn't expected, a strange, low-grade grief for a version of my wife I now understood I might have partly invented. Ruth's final report included the photographs from Hills and Vine, the same restaurant I'd watched through a window myself, along with hotel receipts spanning 4 months, texts pulled from a secondary phone Lorna kept in her gym bag, and a single photograph that stopped me longer than anything else. Lorna and Marcus at what looked like a small dinner party, other people around the table, relaxed, familiar, like this wasn't new. Like this was a life. I recognized one of the other people at that table. Renee, my wife's sister, had known. Not suspected. Known, sat at a table with the man, smiled for a photograph, and told me nothing. That single photograph did more work than the affair itself, in some ways. It meant the deception wasn't just Lorna's. It had a support system. People I trusted had been quietly managing my blindness for months, and some part of me understood, looking at Renee's easy smile in that photo, that my sister-in-law had chosen a side a long time before I ever got a vote. I didn't confront Renee. I didn't confront Lorna. I put the folder back in my truck, under the seat, exactly where it had been, and drove to work like it was a normal Tuesday. That was the choice I made, to hold what I knew privately, use it to confirm what I already suspected, and say nothing yet. Not because I was building towards some dramatic reveal, because I needed, for reasons I couldn't fully explain even to myself, one more week of being a man whose wife hadn't been caught yet. If you've ever known something certain and still needed a few more days before you let it become true, that week is the part of this story I understand best now, and the part one regret least. The following Saturday, I told Lorna I had a site inspection out of town and would be gone until evening. It wasn't a lie, exactly. I did have a site inspection in the morning. What I didn't tell her was that I drove back early, parked 2 streets from Hills and Vine, and waited. I watched her arrive at 1 p.m., meet Marcus at an outdoor table, and spend 2 hours in a version of ease I hadn't seen from her at home in over a year. She laughed with her whole face. She touched his hand without checking who was watching first. She looked, from 30 yards away, like a woman who had stopped performing. I didn't feel rage watching that. I felt something quieter and worse. The recognition that whatever she'd needed, for a long time, I hadn't been giving her, and somewhere along the way she'd stopped believing I ever would again. That didn't make what she did right. It made it, for the length of that afternoon, almost understandable, and I hated how much that understanding cost me. I drove home before she did. I didn't say anything that night either. That same week, a second thread I'd been half-tracking finally connected to the main one. My business partner Devin had mentioned, weeks earlier, that Lorna's company was being courted for acquisition by a larger firm, and that the man leading due diligence on the buyer's side was named Marcus Devereaux. I'd filed that fact away as coincidence when Devon first said it. It wasn't coincidence. Marcus wasn't just an affair. He was, professionally, positioned to have significant influence over Lorna's job security in the coming months. Whatever she told herself about this being purely about feeling seen again, there was also, underneath it, something more calculated. A woman managing her own career anxiety by keeping the man who controlled part of her professional future very, very close. I didn't know yet how much that mattered. I would later. On Monday, I sat down with a lawyer, not to file anything yet, just to understand my position. Sarah Kwan, a family law attorney a colleague had recommended, walked me through what would happen if I changed the locks versus waiting for a formal filing. She was matter-of-fact about it in a way I found strangely calming. "You're not required to confront her," she said. "You're not required to wait for her to confess, either. If the house is solely in your name and you want to establish a clear line, you can. It'll get messy. It usually does. But messy isn't the same as wrong." I left her office with a plan I hadn't fully admitted to myself I already had. She thought her secret would hold a while longer. It held for exactly 6 more days. The locksmith came on a Thursday afternoon while Lorna was, according to her last text, at the Bellcrest wrap dinner. Don't wait up. I watched him work. For exterior locks, 20 minutes, businesslike and quiet, the ordinary rhythm of a man doing a job that had nothing to do with the fact that it was ending my marriage. While he worked, I packed 2 suitcases with Lorna's clothes, folded with more care than I felt, and set them on the porch. I didn't throw anything. I didn't break anything. I moved through the house like someone closing up a store for the last time, methodical, final, quiet. I left her jewelry box untouched on the dresser. I left her side of the closet half full, the things that mattered least. I took down one photo from the hallway, the 2 of us at Niagara Falls, 8 years ago, and set it face down in a drawer. I didn't know why that one felt necessary. It just did. At 11:40 p.m., her key didn't turn in the lock. I heard her try it twice. Then a third time, harder. Then her voice, muffled through the door. "Clay?" I opened it. She stood on the porch in the navy dress, holding one suitcase already, the second at her feet where I'd set it. "Why won't the key work, Clay?" she asked. I didn't answer her question. "I saw you at Hills and Vine," I said instead. "Both times." Her face did 3 things in under 2 seconds. Shock, then a flicker of calculation, then something that settled, almost instantly, into indignation. That sequence told me more than anything she said next. "You're being insane," she said. "You changed the locks? Over a business dinner." "Marcus isn't a client," I said. "I have a folder that says so." She went quiet for exactly as long as it took her to decide her next move. Then, "So you've been spying on me." "I hired someone to confirm what I already knew," I said. "There's a difference." "This is humiliating," she said, and her voice cracked. Not with remorse. I understood even in the moment, but with something closer to wounded pride. "You're going to do this on my porch? Where the neighbors can. You're not coming in tonight," I said. "Or, I think, any night after this one." She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She stood on that porch and told me I was overreacting, that I'd never even given her the chance to explain, that 15 years didn't just end over one dinner, as though I hadn't just told her I knew there'd been more than one. "You made me feel invisible for years," she said, sharper now. "You were always at that office. I was a placeholder in my own house." "Maybe," I said. "That doesn't answer the question you asked me." She stopped. Something in her face shifted, not toward apology, but toward a kind of exhausted honesty she hadn't planned on giving me yet. "You want to know everything?" she said. "Fine." She told me. This is what she said, standing on that porch, suitcase at her feet, in pieces that didn't come out clean. "It started at a work thing in March, a launch dinner, nothing planned. Marcus said something that made me laugh for real, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time that it happened at home. I told myself one drink after wasn't anything. Then it was 2 dinners. Then it wasn't dinners anymore. I kept telling myself I'd stop once Bellcrest wrapped, then once the acquisition settled, then once. There was always a once. The acquisition mattered more than I told you, Clay. Marcus is leading due diligence on my company. I told myself that was a coincidence for a long time. It wasn't, not really. I let it get complicated because some part of me liked having leverage I never had to ask you for. Renee knew almost from the start. I made her come to one dinner so I wouldn't feel like I was disappearing completely. I couldn't look at your face some mornings. I started avoiding the kitchen table because that photo of us at the falls was right there in the hallway, and I didn't want to walk past it. I don't know when I stopped trying to stop. I just know that by June, I wasn't scared of losing you anymore. I was scared of going back to feeling like nobody noticed me at all. I stood there and let it land. Not the affair. I already knew the shape of that. The acquisition detail was new, and it recast something I'd half understood as simple longing into something with calculation folded inside it. I thought of the photograph with Renee at that table, smiling, and understood now exactly what she'd been smiling at. You used him for the acquisition too, I said. It wasn't a question. That's not fair, Lorna said, and for the first time her voice actually shook. It wasn't only that. I didn't say it was only that, I said. I said it was there. She had nothing for that. The porch light buzzed above us. Somewhere down the street a dog barked twice and stopped. So that's it, she said finally. 15 years, and you're just done? No fighting for it. I think you decided that part a while ago, I said. I just changed the locks. She picked up both suitcases. At the end of the driveway, she turned back once. You'll regret doing this the ugly way, she said. Maybe, I said. I don't think so. I closed the door. I didn't watch her drive away. I didn't know it yet, but her attorney would call mine inside of 4 days. And the version of events Lorna would tell that lawyer would look almost nothing like the woman who'd just stood on my porch. Lorna's attorney served me 11 days later, a formal filing that framed the locked-out night as abrupt and retaliatory, painting me, in careful legal language, as a man who'd humiliated his wife on their own porch without cause. There was no mention of Hills and Vine, no mention of Marcus, no mention of the acquisition. Just a narrative where a devoted wife had come home to a locked door and a husband unwilling to communicate. Sarah, my attorney, wasn't rattled. We have Ruth's documentation, she said. We have the bank records. This isn't complicated once the evidence is in the room. It wasn't complicated. 6 weeks of filings, one mediation session where Lorna sat across a table and repeated, almost verbatim, the same grievance from the porch, humiliated, disposable, no chance to explain, and never once, in that room, said the word sorry. The house, solely in my name from before the marriage, stayed with me. The financial split was clean, unremarkable, over faster than either of us probably expected. Marcus, as it turned out, had ended things with Lorna within 3 weeks of the locks changing, quietly, by text, according to Renee, who eventually told me more than she meant to over an accidental run-in at the pharmacy. The acquisition had closed. He no longer needed the leverage, professional or otherwise, and once the affair became a legal matter instead of a secret, he was gone before the first mediation date. I never met him. I never wanted to. Lorna's mother, Diane, called me once, unprompted, in September. She mistook your peace for weakness, she said, quiet, almost apologetic on her daughter's behalf. She thought stability meant nothing was ever going to change, so she went looking for something that would. I don't think she understood what she was giving up until it was already gone. I didn't say much back. There wasn't much to say. The quiet came slowly, not all at once. I started sleeping through the night again sometime in October. I noticed it the way you notice weather, a small shift you don't announce, just live inside of. May came by most Sundays. We didn't talk about Lorna much. We didn't need to. One evening in November, I found the Niagara Falls photo still face down in the drawer where I'd left it back in July. I picked it up, looked at it once, 2 people who'd meant it, once, whatever came after, and didn't put it back face down this time. I set it on a shelf in the garage, not the hallway. Somewhere it could exist without being in the way of the life I was actually living now. I chose peace that night on the porch, before I even had the words for it. I've chosen it most days since. It's the only kind of winning that ever actually held up. I hung the last box of Lorna's remaining things on a hook by the garage door for her to pick up. She came for it on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. I asked her to, deliberately, so there'd be no scene, no porch, no locked door this time. When I got home, the hook was empty. The house was quiet in the specific, settled way houses get once nothing in them is waiting for anything anymore. I stood in the kitchen a minute, keys still in my hand, and set them down on the counter without looking twice. That's my story. A folded name in a glove compartment, a photograph turned face down, a set of new keys that finally opened a door that was only mine. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. If any part of this felt familiar, tell me in the comments. I read every one, and I'd genuinely love to hear your own story too. See you in the next one. The most painful detail in this story isn't the restaurant, or the second phone, or even the porch. It's that Clayton spent 5 months gathering proof of something he could have simply asked about on any given Tuesday. And the reason he didn't wasn't fear of the answer being yes. It was fear of what asking would cost him if the answer forced him to stop being the husband who never had to ask. That's the deeper pattern underneath this whole story. Two people who mistook the absence of conflict for the presence of intimacy. Clayton built a marriage on not needing reassurance, and Lorna built a second life on not being able to find any inside the first one. Neither of those things happened overnight, and neither of them happened in a vacuum. His conflict avoidance created exactly the kind of silence a restless, underseen person can disappear into without ever technically lying about where she was going. What's easy to miss, watching Lorna from the outside, is that her calculation around the acquisition doesn't make her fear less real. It just means people rarely betray a marriage for one clean reason. She was lonely and she was strategic in the same season of her life, and both of those things were true at once, which is a harder thing to sit with than a simple villain would have been. The point of no return in this story isn't the locks. It's the mediation table, when Lorna had a room, a lawyer, and every opportunity to finally say the honest thing out loud. And she reached for humiliated and disposable instead of sorry. That's the moment the marriage stopped being something either of them was grieving and became, instead, something that had simply already ended, with paperwork left to catch up. Clayton's peace at the end isn't a victory lap. It's the quiet, unglamorous result of a man who finally stopped outsourcing his own certainty to someone else's silence. The house is emptier now, and steadier, in exactly the way a life gets when it stops accommodating a lie it never agreed to carry. If there's a question worth sitting with after a story like this, it isn't whether you'd have changed the locks. It's simpler and harder. How long would you keep choosing not to ask the question you already knew the answer to? And what would it finally take for you to stop?